This is Senator Jim Runstead, and I'm very pleased to have a fabulous guest, a guest we have had before, but we really need an update on what's going on in South Africa. So Jaco Kleynhans is my guest, and he's with the Solidarity Movement in South Africa, and they're dedicated to making sure that the South Africans, particularly the farmers over there, can live freely and safely. And I don't know if you followed the news, but they have not been living freely and safely. In fact, I was at the Farmington Hills Holocaust Center, and the South African farmers were listed as a genocide against them by the government. So there's a lot to discuss here, and without further ado, welcome, Jaco, and why don't you give us a little bit of an update about what's happening currently in South Africa?
Yes, thank you, Senator, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you again and for your friendship to our people here in South Africa. We are very appreciative of that. The same is the case for so many other politicians and political leaders in America. Over the last few years, we've seen quite an increase in the exposure about what's happening in South Africa, and we believe that what's happening here is a warning sign and can be a warning sign for many Western countries, not only the United States of America, but also many European countries. South Africa is certainly one of the best examples of the experiment of socialism gone wrong. The whole idea of DEI, of racial politics, always focusing on racial differences in the community. We have in government now for 32 years that implemented socialist policies, race-based legislation, 143 racial laws. They've been the kind of a country and the kind of government that I think Western people need to look at and say, this is exactly what we don't want in our societies. And then it's really concerning that the mayor of New York recently said in an interview in a well-known American publication that he views South Africa as the best example for New York, for the city of New York, and he based that on the socialist policies in South Africa. So where we stand at the moment, I think there's certainly a much better knowledge of South Africa in America and globally due to the fact of what people like yourself and other American leaders and President Trump did over the last 2 or 3 years. There's an awareness of farm murders in South Africa, of land expropriation, the expropriation bill that our president signed. There's an awareness of the racial discrimination against minorities in South Africa like ourselves. And there's an awareness of the socialist failures of South Africa, where about 40% of the South African population today are dependent on welfare, which is absolutely unsustainable.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I remember racial laws in history going back to, I think it was in the early to mid 1930s in Germany under the Nazis. They had a whole series of racial laws that they passed. And we're seeing that, yes, here in this country, where this DEI, this attempt to use critical race theory in America to divide the students into oppressors and victims. It is the philosophy that is more responsible for more mass murder, more a sea of blood, of hate that has existed of any philosophy throughout history, where you get people into tribal thinking to look at those who are different from you as part of an enemy tribe, that you want to have grievance where your group is the victims and the other group is the oppressors. And that's precisely what's been happening in South Africa. And you're right, it's been happening here in the United States as well. So I'm glad we're getting an opportunity to flesh this out a little bit more. So why don't you tell me, has there been any improvement in the conditions of South African farmers in particular since Trump raised awareness with the issue?
Yes, I think that's a very important question, and I'm very happy that you asked that, because I think that was certainly one of the biggest problems over the last 30 years for us. As a minority, we as an organization also represent most of South Africa's commercial farmers. Just to give you an idea again, South Africa is a country of 64 million people, quite a large population, but there's only 30,000 commercial farmers left in South Africa. Despite that, we are still a net exporter of agricultural products products. You can find on American supermarket shelves South African citrus products, wine, nuts, fruit juice, many other agricultural products, even meat that we export here from South Africa. So we're very proud of our farmers who are mostly of European and Dutch, German descent and who farmed in this country for the last 350 years. But they do that under really difficult conditions, and we've spoke about that in the past, the farm attacks in the country, the fact that 3,000 farmers were killed over the last 3 decades. What is interesting since we spoke the last time, what happened is that the bad news is that there were in the last 12 months an increase in farm attacks, but there were actually a decrease in the number of people who died. And the reason for that is simply that we are equipping farmers better to protect themselves. Farmers have better security on their farms. They have radio systems. They are connected to a national radio system now. They have camera systems. They have electric fencing around their houses. They get weapons training so that they can protect themselves if they are attacked at night in their houses. And much of this are done by donations from our members, but also increasingly from abroad. And we are very thankful about that. The American government, the Trump administration really did a lot to create awareness of that. I've spoken to farmers in Michigan, farming groups in Michigan who are very aware of this, who are doing fundraising over the last few months to support South African farmers and to ensure that they are safer and that they are better prepared to react when farm attacks happen. We can't stop farm attacks. We can't prevent them from happening. It's a large country. People live in very isolated rural places, but we can help farmers, especially middle class and poorer farmers, to better protect themselves whenever they are attacked.
Do they have the right to have weapons? I know here in America, we have the Second Amendment. It's one of the greatest things about the American system. We're the only country that has a First Amendment, meaning that the government is not supposed to constrain our ability to freely express our ideas. And then the Second Amendment, which means we have the right to keep and bear arms. Are the South African farmers able to arm themselves, or is the government hindering that?
Yes, they are, but it's becoming more and more difficult. And I think this is an important point to make. And I'm again very happy that you asked this question, because if you go 40 years back, 4 decades back, most people in South Africa owned firearms. It was very easy, and we had very low crime rates. Over the last 3 decades, the government brought in all kinds of new regulations. They're making it more and more difficult for people to keep their firearms. You need to go through regular relicensing of firearms. You need to do all kinds of training every 5 years, especially when people get older. It gets more difficult for them. It's very costly. There's lots of costs involved in the applications to register your firearms every 5 years, to do the training, all the paperwork. And that make it for people who can't afford it, or are say in their 70s or 80s and still live on farms, more and more difficult to keep their farms. So the government are slowly but surely installing more and more regulations, more and more laws to make it more difficult. There's even a white paper in our parliament at the moment, a proposed bill to ban certain more classes of firearms that will make it nearly impossible for farmers to own farms for self-defense. They want to take away the right to own a gun for self-defense. You can only do that if you want to hunt or for other reasons, and that will be unacceptable for us. So we are also fighting this in courts. That's a very, very important constant fight against the government to take these cases to the courts and to ensure that people retain their right to own firearms.
We face a constant threat here in America from the left and often from the liberal courts, who would like to also remove our right to keep and bear arms. But I'll tell you what, for the South African farmer, I can't even imagine if you couldn't defend yourself, how horrifying, because I've seen the images of what happens to these white South African farmers. They seem like they rarely just kill them outright with a machete blow or a shot to the head. The torture, the horrific, monstrous, gruesome, despicable behavior that happens to these people, I'm just amazed that they would stick it out, with the potential of these monsters getting hold of you and just, I won't describe to the audience what's the stuff, but I mean, you can go watch some of the videos online. You probably can't watch more than a second of it. It's so horrifying. But to leave these people powerless in the face of this horror is despicable, disgusting, and it seems like that South African government is constantly trying to curtail the rights of its own citizens, a government that sings a song about the mass murder of citizens by race. I'm sure in the whole world, there's only one government that sings a song advocating the mass murder of its own citizens on the basis of race. So I just can't imagine how horrible this process is. Can you tell us a little bit about the land expropriation policy? Has that gotten any better, or still that's terrible?
Yes, so that's another very important issue, and that's also linked to what President Trump did last year. So we're very delighted on the executive order that President Trump signed last year in February, focusing on us as Afrikaner people, as a minority in South Africa, and on the situation in the country, the farm murders, the singing of that terrible song, Kill the Boer, which means kill the farmer, and then the Expropriation Act that our president signed that allows for expropriation of land without any compensation. So there will be no compensation involved. So we're still fighting that in courts. There's a court case going on at the moment where we as an organization are directly involved. We took the government to court, and we hope to hear from that soon, within the next few months. But the Trump administration in Washington are still standing very strongly on their demands that if the South African government want better trade agreements, want investments from the American government, want a solid relationship with the American government, then they need to drop this Expropriation Act. Every country can have an Expropriation Act. That's normal. But you can't expropriate people's land or their property without any compensation. You can't go on and sing a song that all farmers can get killed or must be killed. And the president are not willing to distance himself from that and to tell his people to stop singing that. That is one of President Trump's demands. So on the Expropriation Act, I think the good news is that the court case is still going on. And while the court case is going on, they can't expropriate any land. What is happening at the moment, and I think that's a big problem, is that people just occupy land. So you will just get up in the morning and there will be 500 people living on your farm. And that happens more and more. And the government is unwilling then to act. The government is not willing to send in the police or even send in the army and remove that people. There's quite an increase in that. We've seen an increase in that in more urban areas like Johannesburg, Pretoria, around the big cities. If you go 5 or 10 or 15 miles from those cities, you find many of these agricultural areas where farmers lost their land, not due to expropriation, but simply because their land were occupied. And the government say, well, this is good. We don't have a problem with this. So farmers in South Africa face serious challenges, and I think that's one of the reasons why we also see that there's so many South African farmers today in America and who work there on farms, but we still want to make sure that there will be farmers in South Africa in 50 years or 100 years' time. And that is why we must make sure that this expropriation bill either are kicked out by the South African courts, that we win our case in the South African Constitutional Court, or that the American pressure by President Trump and the Trump administration, that will succeed to ensure that the South African government agrees with the American government on a deal that will lead to a change in the Expropriation Act, to ensure that the whole idea of zero compensation for land, that will be removed from that bill.
It's interesting. We talked about racial laws that the South African government is passing, and it reminded me, that was in the 1930s by Hitler. There was something else that was done in the 1930s. It was expropriation without compensation. Oh, yes, that also was by the fascists in Nazi Germany. So the South African government is right on line with the Nazi fascist philosophy of Adolf Hitler. So I'm not surprised that we continue to hear of this vile, horrific philosophy against a people who, what you said, 360 years have lived there, generations, and I've done a little reading about what that area was like 360 years ago. Scrubland, very, very difficult to carve out any kind of a living at all. For these people to be run off by the British, go into the interior of South Africa, rebuild an entire society there, and then be faced with this monstrous genocidal government that is wanting to sing about murdering the citizens of its own land. I'm so glad that the president has taken this seriously. I'm gravely concerned when the president's not there with the next, maybe a liberal administration that is going to say, hey, genocide's a good thing. I mean, literally, it wouldn't surprise me from what I hear from the left.
Absolutely. I mean, I do regular liaison in Washington. I was just 2 weeks ago in the American capital, and that is worrying to me. If you talk to certain left-wing politicians, they will tell you, well, you have no place in Africa. You don't belong in Africa. And I tell them, well, I have no other place or other home than Africa. I don't associate with the German culture or the Dutch culture or the French culture. We were a people born in Africa 360 years ago. In 1652, our forefathers came to Africa. Our language were born here. Our culture were born here. And we're African. We're Westerners in Africa. We're Western people in Africa. So it's alarming that there are more and more American left-wing politicians, academics, people in the media who think that we as Afrikaners don't have a right to live here. In South Africa, we don't have a place. Well, the answer is very simple. We don't have any other place. But we see that kind of rhetoric also when there's discussions in other places in the world, in America and Australia. I've seen it in New Zealand and other places. They always bring up colonialism, they bring up history, they bring up slavery without giving it or talking about it within a certain context. You know, what happened in South Africa was, and you've read about the history of South Africa, had nothing to do with colonialism. 90% of what is today South Africa was empty 360 years ago. There were no people here. You know, we came here and settled it and really created one of the most impressive agricultural industries in the world over a very long period. And I'm very proud of my forefathers and what they've achieved. And I think that is why our story is so inspiring to many Americans. And my message is always to Americans, you know, protect what you have, protect your right to freedom of speech, your right to own a firearm, your right to property rights, and I can go on and on. Those things are always threatened. There's always people who are willing to try and take that away from you so that they can enrich themselves. We have one of the wealthiest governments in the world. If you look at our government ministers, the people who govern South Africa, they are extremely wealthy. They all have money in foreign bank accounts, in foreign countries, owning lots of properties, while the people are extremely poor. South Africa is one of the, or have some of the highest unemployment rates in the world, but we have an extremely wealthy elite, a socialist elite who sometimes even refer to themselves as communists, while they hang out in the wealthiest cities in the world, shopping in Singapore and then in Thailand, and then they're in Europe. But then there are communists. And we need to warn Americans about this, you know, to understand that what happened in South Africa can also happen in any other country like America.
It certainly can, and I'm sure some of the people watching this are completely ignorant of anything about South Africa. I've done some reading on it, and you're absolutely right. That area of South Africa was scrubland. There was no real population there. They built that from nothing, and now after all these generations, these leftist liberals say, well, you don't have the right to live there. Now, all your entire history of generations you've lived there, but if you come to the United States, break into the country illegally, break the laws, and you just set foot here, you have the right to stay here forever. I mean, the hypocrisy knows no bounds, and it's just really disturbing thinking about the trajectory of not only South Africa, if you aren't able to beat back this monstrous racist regime. And same thing here. If the left is able to prevail and do what they're trying to do in every school in America with critical race theory, divide the students, divide them into camps, divide and conquer. That's what it's about. In South Africa, all those rich people prancing around, living on the high, they want the people below them divided. That's why they like the idea of getting the black population against the white population. Probably within the black population, they're trying to divide them too. It's all divide and conquer. So the people, the string pullers at the top, the elites can continue getting all the money and the power. And with that, we're coming to close to our end of our time. Is there any final thoughts that you would like to leave us with to kind of give us that final update of what's happening there in South Africa?
Yes, I would just like to say again our appreciation for yourself and your office and what you've done in Michigan in terms of awareness. I think it was 5 years ago. I've traveled for the first time to Michigan, and no one knew about what's happening in South Africa. Today, 5 years later, through the work of people like yourself and some of your colleagues, there's broad awareness in Michigan. We have, like I've said, farmers in Michigan who support South African farmers. We have projects to do fundraising for some students at some of our own schools. There's wonderful things happening. We, through all of this, made President Trump aware about this problem. President Trump wasn't aware of the problems in South Africa 10 years ago. Today, he's very much aware. He's fighting for our cause as the most powerful man in the world from the White House. We have friends in the Senate, in the House of Representatives. So we don't lose hope. As Afrikaners, also a religious people, we always believe in a calling. We believe there's always hope for the future. And we believe that we were put here at the southern point of Africa to make a difference, to improve the lives of everyone here. We don't want the divisions that the government sow. We don't want the failures, the socialist failures that they are experimenting with. And we therefore want to say thank you and give our appreciation for the support from America, but also give a warning and say you're always busy with the next fight, protecting what you have. A very, very good example will always be the mayor of New York. He grew up in South Africa that many people don't know of. And still until today, recently, he referred to South Africa as the great socialist example for America. I can tell you about the failures, and you need to protect your country and make sure that what happened in South Africa the last 3 decades don't also happen in future in America.
Yes, it's very instructive what has happened in terms of economic decline in South Africa, massive crime. I think at points it was like the worst crime wave in the entire globe. And as Jefferson said, freedom and liberty is not passed on in the bloodstream to our next generation. It has to be fought for. We have to really be intentional to make sure that we fight for our liberties all the way through, or we're going to end up like South Africa, a socialist hellhole with people in charge who loot the money from everyone else to live high on the hog, and they do it by creating hate and division. So yes, we're going to continue the fight here in the United States against this vile, rotten hate, and appreciate the work you're doing in South Africa on the same level. So thank you, Jaco, for being with us, and we'll get back in touch with you for another update.
Thank you. Appreciate it.